The city of Rome has long remained a mystery to archaeologists. Most of the Eternal City has been buried under subsequent constructions, and yet we can learn a lot from Rome about Roman mentalities. In antiquity, those imposing monuments, those seats of power, such architectures conceived to reach up to the heavens, have always enticed the look of foreigners. The Roman engineers built copies of Rome in every corner of the Mediterranean area. One found everywhere the same amphitheaters, the same forums, the same colonnaded temples. But those cities were no mere copies of the Eternal City. More than that, they were the material sign of a strategy of conquest. Among all those forgotten cities, that of Timgad in Algeria, declared by UNESCO to be part of humanity's World Heritage, is the symbol of an atypical Roman colonization. To understand it, we must immerse ourselves in its history. Rome is more than 600 years old when the men of the Third Parthian Legion land on the coasts of North Africa. Numidia is scorched by the sun. The air is fragrant with the lingering scent of the overheated scrubland. But these men are used to it. They are the veterans of the Emperor Trajan's eastern campaigns. This is the year 100 of our era. The Roman Empire is at its peak. The city of light, Rome, is the capital of a boundless territory. The whole Mediterranean area has been Roman for the past 200 years. How did the Romans achieve such a feat? How were they able to subjugate millions of alien people? Gallic nations, Mauritanians, Numidians, Egyptians, Arabs, or Parthians? How did they build those cities in the depth of arid lands, luring to them populations that had been nomadic for thousands of years? How could they keep under control a 16 million square kilometer large territory and its 80 million inhabitants? Those who have for long believed that the Romans had imposed themselves by the sheer force of their legions were wrong. In fact, Rome has found nourishment in the amazing African vitality. The ruins of those lost North African cities still keep the memory of that mysterious alchemy between two people, two worlds, two civilizations. But before reaching that target, Rome had to get rid of all its adversaries and prevent them from damaging its power forever. The entire fate of the great Roman epic has no doubt been played out on the shores of the Mediterranean Sea. In the 2nd century BC, Carthage, the hated rival city at the gates of Africa, prevents Rome from ruling supreme over the great inland sea. For much too long, Hannibal's elephants have been a heavy and bloody threat on the Italian peninsula. The Romans will no longer have enemies at the gates of their capital city. They want to gain control of the sea routes that may give them access to a flourishing trade with the Near East and Egypt. If the legions seize Carthage, the Punic city will have to be erased from the world's map, and so it will be. In the year 146 BC, the legions of Scipio, the Aemilian, capture Carthage after bitter fighting. Refusing to surrender to their sworn enemy, the inhabitants have thrown themselves into the fires of a huge pyre. The Roman army will leave of the Punic city but a carpet of cinders. They raise it methodically, as if to annihilate its very recollection. Thus, the archaeologists have found the traces of that wealthy capital city. Strata of coal, of molten lead, of bricks, and shattered pieces of pottery. The legionnaires had turned Carthage into dust. The Roman city was then built on these dreadful foundations. It had crushed the corpse of its enemy. Henceforth, the gates of Africa are broken open. A new conquest is now led by the swords of the legions of the Eternal City, Rome. Mare Nostrum, our sea, is the name Romans give to the Mediterranean, an inland lake of an empire that spreads from the British Isles to the banks of the Euphrates. Nothing has resisted the armies of the Republic. When the first Emperor Augustus accedes to the throne in the year 27 BC, the borders of the empire are already set. In the West and in Africa, Rome has spun its web by bribing the vanquished sovereigns, reaching agreements with the local elites, or naming the governors of the provinces. Then the conquest has continued towards the east, on the steps of Alexander the Great. In the year 105, the Emperor Trajan launches his troops against the Parthian warriors of Mesopotamia. The Roman legions already have spread their eagles in the mountains of Anatolia, on the slopes of Mount Zagros, and in Syria's deserts as the many signs of their passage. At Zegma, Rome's troops have left their stamp even on the stone of the quarries meant to build sumptuous cities. As they move on, the legions are building the Roman universe. Further south, in what is now Arabia, Trajan succeeds in what no one had been able to do before, subjugating the Nabatean civilization. The great strategist breaks through the land-locking cliffs that had so far protected Petra from invasions. New temples are erected, and the engineers also hew the rock as a fresh casing for Roman theaters. Thus, Arabia is overpowered. Rome's eagle has now under its wing 80 million people of various cultures and denominations. Its rule will last 300 years. In the year 100, the Third Trajan Legion settles in Timgad, North Africa. When they discovered the ruins of Timgad and of the other Roman cities of North Africa, the French archaeologists seriously thought that they had excavated the proof that Europe had brought, in the wake of the legions, civilization to the barbarians of the Maghreb, thus justifying the colonization of these territories by turning the colonial forces into the new legions of the Western world. They couldn't imagine that it wasn't Africa who had become Roman, but that Rome had become African. During the 19th century, in a very few years, dozens of archaeologists undertook to exhume from the sands this city, soon named the Pompeii of Africa. It must be acknowledged that its dimensions are so much more impressive that all the materials used to build it were purposely brought to the spot. Stone and marble had traveled dozens, even hundreds of kilometers to reach this city of the Ores region, isolated in the middle of the mountains. Due to the fact that it was based on a perfect quadrilateral, it was thought that Timgad's blueprint was a copy of that of a legion's camp. But to grasp the meaning of the remains left by its inhabitants, it was necessary to go back in time to the period when it had been founded. Its minutely detailed plan delivers a message that only specialists in ancient architecture are able to decode.
Ce qui frappe d'abord sur cette vue aérienne, c'est ce plan parfaitement géométrique de Timgad. C'est tellement parfait comme plan et finalement assez rare qu'on a cru au départ qu'il s'agissait d'un camp, du plan d'un camp romain purement et simplement repris. Lorsqu'on regarde l'organisation intérieure, une fois passé ce stade du plan damier, du plan orthogonal, on retrouve tous les éléments d'une ville romaine et on comprend ce qu'était Timgad pour ceux qui l'ont conçu au départ, une véritable vitrine de ce qu'était la civilisation romaine, la romanité, dans un pays qui était en cours d'occupation, dans ces hautes plaines du nord de l'Aurès. Ce qui est peut-être le plus représentatif de l'urbanisme romain dans ce plan de Timgad, c'est l'emplacement du forum, exactement au plein centre de la ville, à l'intersection des deux axes initiaux, le Decumanus Maximus, le Cardo Maximus, un forum que, grâce aux archéologues du XIXe siècle, il faut bien le dire, nous avons la chance de voir dans sa totalité aujourd'hui, et avec un nombre d'édifices, de bâtiments qui est tout à fait remarquable. Alors, on retrouve là, en fait, les éléments du forum romain classique, à commencer ici par la curie, qui évidemment fait penser à la situation de Rome. On a ici toute une série de bases de statues qui étaient les bases qui portaient les statues des notables de la Timgad du IIe et du IIIe siècle notamment.
This forum, those public buildings, those religious edifices, the whole local life they imply are a kind of enigma. It's a miniature copy of Rome, but with what aim? The Algerian archaeologist Nassera Ben Sedik has devoted her life to Roman antiquity in North Africa. She knows that the Punic civilization hadn't waited for the Romans to build cities on the Mediterranean shores. However, urbanization was less frequent in the hinterland. The high plateaus in which Timgad was set usually were peopled by nomadic populations. The area still is far from being a lush paradise. The presence of the city here is a mystery. On what kind of wealth were its founders relying on? Who were those who first laid the foundation stones? Why did they go so far into such inhospitable lands? The first elements to have an answer are to be found in the city itself.
Timgad, comme tout le monde sait, a été fondé par l'empereur Trajan en 100, au départ avec un petit groupe de citoyens romains, parmi lesquels des civils et des vétérans. Alors, ce qui nous intéresse, nous ici, puisque c'est pour montrer que c'est un des rares vétérans dont on ait des traces, et qui était au moment de la fondation de la ville, c'est surtout donc cette expression où on sait donc qu'il est missi honesta missione ab imperatore Traiano optimo Augusto Germanico Dacico Partico. Ça veut dire qu'il a été envoyé ou renvoyé en congé honorable par l'empereur Trajan, ce qui pour nous est très intéressant. Ça veut dire donc que c'est le moment de la fondation, et surtout le congé honorable veut dire qu'il est à la retraite, c'est un vétéran.
In the early years of the 2nd century of our era, the legions settled permanently in Numidia, north of the Aurès region, in a very large camp at Lambès. They keep watch over a huge area, Caesarian Mauritania, which covers most of modern Algeria. But for Rome, it is less a matter of occupying the land than of having its civilization make headway. Once they've won, the legionaries lay down their weapons. In their ranks, there are the best specialists, engineers, architects, workmen specialized in construction. They will build cities in the best Roman tradition. But they do not only work at it. Most of them also bring their families along. The soldiers from the auxiliary cohorts finish their enlistment there with a gift from Rome: citizenship. A diploma drafted on a sheet of lead is delivered to them. A duplicate is hung in the Forum of Rome. After 25 years of service, the veterans and their children thus become Roman by rights. They will then wear the toga, which signals citizenship. They will also be able to trade and get rich enough to raise a statue in praise of their benefactor.
Rome ne compte pas seulement sur le côté militaire de sa mission, elle compte aussi beaucoup sur l'attrait. Il faut attirer les populations, il ne faut pas seulement leur faire peur ou les combattre.
The city of Timgad is a showcase of Romanity. It looks like all of its sister cities founded around the Mediterranean, all of them connected by 90,000 kilometers of cobbled roads. Thus, the traveler is never disoriented. He makes his way in an empire that asserts its unity. But what Timgad offers to the traveler and to the local people is access to a social, religious, and intellectual living environment. The city is a center of unavoidable economic activities, but also a place for pleasure and leisure, where the Roman way of living blooms. Many houses have their own well. The city itself has many lavatories as well as latrines, of which some are even heated in wintertime. The least sculpted armrest is of service to Rome by the beauty of its curves. One can imagine the gaze is filled with wonder of the nomads as they discover Roman Timgad, a marvel of architecture that controls a rare commodity in those regions: water.
Donc on va voir comment arrive l'eau dans les thermes. On va essayer de retrouver la canalisation et pour savoir si ça vient de la source ou bien du bassin qui est à côté du fort byzantin. Ça passe là, ça passe là. Voilà, donc la piscine, donc voilà les thermes qui utilisent l'eau. Oui, parce que là-bas, à côté du fort byzantin, ils ont trouvé aussi des conduites. Il y a un bassin, il y a des conduites. Tu as vu? Là aussi.
Ce qui est très frappant à Timgad, c'est l'abondance des thermes, le nombre extraordinaire d'ensembles thermaux, de bains publics et privés qui ont été retrouvés. 27 ensembles en tout. Et puis il ne faut pas oublier qu'on est tout de même en Afrique du Nord, au sud de l'Algérie actuelle, là, dans une région qui est relativement sèche. L'abondance d'eau que supposent les thermes était le plus bel exemple peut-être de ce que pouvait apporter la civilisation romaine, la romanité aux populations africaines.
Under the flagstones of the Cardo and of the Decumanus, the two large avenues of the city, archaeologists have discovered the proof of the amazing modernity of Roman town planning. Their engineers had planned everything.
بدل اقصبر زيد الحياضي غال عافية تبارك تقلش مسحور خدم من ورا ما تخدم الفشور اللي قدر تشتروهم زريق.
There is more than a sewage system in Timgad. In fact, the city has been conceived as a huge reservoir where every drop of water is recovered. The Roman city is indeed a great consumer of the precious liquid. In its depths, a vast system of clarification basins receives the leakage and drainage waters where they are carefully filtered. Then a pipework system conveys them to the dozens of fountains that embellish every street corner. Water runs everywhere. Timgad is a vast oasis. This water feeds mainly the public and private thermal baths, where the whole population meets without distinction of social class or order. Most of them are free. It's obviously in those halls, richly decorated with walls painted in striking colors and with elaborate mosaics, that a visitor will be awed by the fineness of Roman civilization. In the recesses, he'll see statues. On the walls, portrayals of the world on which Timgad's citizen rules. The floor is studded with mythological descriptions. Thus, Rome's gods put their stamp on the minds and step by step are added to the local divinities. It is also in these bathhouses, where the people of note speak in the Latin tongue, that is built up these people's common destiny. Their embellishments attest to the pleasures of life in Timgad: hunting, fishing, the enjoyment of good fare. But such polychrome scenes are not a mere trompe-l'oeil to seduce non-believers. In these public places, the Numidians will appropriate a form of art, that of the mosaic, and will transcend it far enough to become undisputed masters of it. If Timgad is indeed a showcase of the riches offered by Rome, it is also a place of exchanges, of an amazing modernity.
Timgad est une ville qui, dans l'Antiquité, disposait déjà de toutes les commodités d'une ville moderne, aussi bien sur le plan de l'approvisionnement en eau, on a vu avec les différentes conduites, les aqueducs, la conduite qui vient ici au terme, les fontaines, que de ce réseau d'évacuation des eaux usées. Et on a pu voir par exemple comme ça que dans les latrines, il y a 19 siècles, il y avait déjà le tout, ce qu'on appelle maintenant le tout à l'égout, et qui dans beaucoup de villes contemporaines n'existe pas encore. Donc Timgad, déjà à cette époque, avait absolument tous les aménagements nécessaires dont aurait besoin une ville moderne.
It is in these thermal baths, whose foundations have stood up to times where, that Timgad's inhabitants meet daily for that act of everyday life, which is almost a ceremonial one, the bath. The men of the 3rd Legion built this city in just a few years, but soon Timgad will flare beyond the initial quadrilateral plan to spread into the neighboring countryside. Its rampart becomes useless. The villas of nobilities invade the suburbs, though the landowners prefer a resident in town where they can enjoy themselves after a day's work on the land. Timgad lures people like a magnet, and its success still amazes us. It's hard to believe other cities in North Africa may have shared in this success. And yet, from the borders of Libya to the gates of the Atlantic Ocean, all North Africa is covered with colonies similar to Timgad. But not all of them are based on a plan as rectilinear as Timgad's is. The city of Duga is built against the slope of a hill towering above the farmed lands. It is surrounded by thousands of olive trees. Like Timgad, Duga has a water recovery and draining system. Even the theater was used as a funnel to collect the least shower. In spite of an almost desert climate, the Licinian baths rose on several stories, and the city also had thermal baths equipped with latrines. where upper-class people met to discuss the future of the city. At about 100 kilometers from Duga, and sitting imposingly in the midst of cereal-growing lands, is Bula Regia. The heat there was so intense that wealthy landowners had another house built by boring it out of the rock, an exact copy of the first one, but much cooler in the summer. Rooms and halls were decorated with mosaics. 2,000 years have not tarnished the splendor of this Venus, arising from the seas. Everywhere we'll see the same concern for detail and the same sophisticated taste inspired by the Roman artistic tradition. And everywhere, the same buildings, the curia, the temples, the thermal baths. The elites alone took advantage of this living environment. The farthest countryside would only partly benefit from the city's wealth. Rome's influence was less active there. The peasants still preserved their own language, their traditional way of life and dressing. The works undertaken under the aegis of Rome to equip and modernize these almost virgin lands at the time will keep amazing us by their enormous size and their longevity. To enable Roman Carthage to have enough drinking water, the engineers will carry out a gigantic construction, a prowess that no ensuing civilization will repeat in this region. The Aqueduct of Zaguan is a 30-meter-high wall conveying water from the mountains 132 kilometers away. At Malaga, it supplies with water the hugest hydraulic reservoir of the whole Roman world, cisterns containing 60,000 cubic meters of liquid. The solid masonry of the stone arches has so well resisted to times wear that some of the aqueduct sections still irrigate the Tunisian lowlands. "2,000 years have gone by, and the shepherds still come here to water their flocks. These modern peasants still benefit from antiquity's heritage." Pax Romana has united populations as varied as Thracians, Gallics, Syrians, or Numidians. In North Africa, Rome did not appeal to violence to impose the uniformity of its civilization. Its integration system worked through an urban environment. Temples and triumphal arches expressed a belonging to the Roman fatherland. The sharing in festivities strongly rooted some traditions. More than any other building, one of them expressed the adoption of certain mores. The amphitheater. The amphitheater at Tignères is the third largest one in the empire after Rome's Colosseum and Capua's amphitheater. Its remains tower above the modern small town of El Jem with its mere 10,000 souls. Under the empire, the Roman city had 40,000 inhabitants, and the amphitheater could gather 30,000 people. The city's public, as well as those who'd hastened to come from the countryside, would be at sumptuous shows financed by generous donors. People would love seeing chariot races, gladiator fights, and hunting shows where men faced wild animals in an entirely reconstructed savanna setting. The spread of Rome's mentality and way of living was also transmitted by these shows. In a few dozen years, Rome succeeded in imposing even its ways of entertainment. Theaters and amphitheaters drew the populations of the land. these monuments were not merely inspired by Roman architectural traditions. Everything was planned to entice the greatest number of people foreign to the city. Thus, amphitheaters played a part in winning over people's hearts. At the University of Caen in France, architects, computer scientists, art historians, or specialists in classics cooperate within the frame of an experimental archaeology project, the virtual reconstruction of the city of Rome. To reinvent it, they've put themselves in the shoes of the Roman engineers. They're able to decode the messages the monuments of these ancient cities reveal to us.
On a une autre preuve de la réussite, et peut-être c'est la plus frappante, de cette greffe que représente une colonie dans cette région du sud-est de l'Algérie, donc de la Numidie antique, c'est le théâtre de Timgad. Un théâtre qui, d'une part, est, on le voit aussi bien sur la photo que sur le plan, un théâtre qui a une forme très classique. On chiffre sa capacité à 3500 ou 4000 places. Je ne sais plus quels sont les chiffres des théâtres romains.
Écoute, Rome avait 3 théâtres qui ont été construits successivement au cours du 1er siècle avant Jésus-Christ. Et pour ce qui est du théâtre de Balbus, par exemple, qui est un des plus petits, il est estimé à une capacité d'à peu près 11 500 personnes.
Près de 4000 places ici pour une ville qui, à l'époque où le théâtre a été construit, avait peut-être 10 000 habitants. 8 à 10 000 habitants, on prend conscience tout de suite de l'énormité. Imaginons une ville moderne en France de 10 000 habitants qui aurait une salle de spectacle de 4 000 places. Et donc cette énorme capacité, manifestement, reflète la volonté d'ouverture de la cité vers l'extérieur, vers les campagnes, vers les populations qui habitaient jusqu'à l'Ambèze. On peut imaginer donc cette foule très bigarrée qui se rendait à la ville pour participer, donc pour vendre les produits des champs, mais aussi goûter au plaisir de la ville et assister à des spectacles théâtraux. C'est un moyen pour Rome finalement de faire admettre et d'intégrer, de faire admettre sa domination, d'intégrer les populations, que la construction de cités comme celle-là, même si celle-ci évidemment au départ semble être une greffe un peu artificielle, mais c'est une greffe qui a très bien pris.
Ouais.
The model for all these provincial cities is Rome. The Romans call it urbs, the city, to show clearly that in their eyes, it is the city par excellence. To reconstruct an image in 3 dimensions of a city vanished for a long time, the research team of the pluridisciplinary unit at Caen has an element which, more than a working starting point, is an authentic work of art, Rome's scale model, designed at the end of the 19th century by the architect Paul Bigot, who relied on plans, topographic and photographic plottings. In the 2nd century of our era, the capital city of the Roman world has more or less 1 million inhabitants. It has largely gone beyond the enclosure of the 5 hills it originally had set itself in 753 before Christ. Rome is the very heart of the empire. This is where its emperors reside, and also where are its most sumptuous temples housing the celebration of imperial cults. The Romans' dedication to administrative problems finds its ground for expression in the Forum, or in the basilicas, where offices and shops are lodged. Heart of the empire, Rome only lives on the produce sent to it by sea through the port of Ostia from the 4 corners of the Mediterranean. Egypt's wheat, North Africa's olive oil, and Gaul's wines feed the mother of all cities. With the passing years, the city has become more and more heterogeneous and cosmopolitan. It is now the living image of the amazing diversity of the lands it rules over. After weeks or months spent on the bumpy roads that crisscross the whole Mediterranean shores, the provincial elites come to absorb the atmosphere by the banks of the Tiber. They go to the Colosseum to see the heroes of their times, the gladiators. They follow passionately the chariot races at the Circus Maximus and see the theatrical performances, whose texts they will take back to their native towns. It takes 5 days to travel the 350 kilometers separating Carthage from Timgad. What joy, seeing again one's town, remembering the lapping of its public fountains, imagining the delights of a bath after a journey on a sun-scorched road, swept by the ochre dusts of the Orez area. What relief to finally see the gates of one's own town, symbolized, as everywhere else in the empire, by a triumphal arch. The road to Lambez reveals the tracks of the endless traffic of chariots and beasts. Timgad's ruins show the scars of the times when this huge stony body was still alive. Deep into the rocks, men have engraved the imprint of their passage. And it is in the Forum, where the crowds would assemble on market days and citizens would meet after their baths, that we find 2,000-year-old graffiti. Between the columns, on the very ground, unknown people have notched the stone to engrave in it mysterious parlor games round which men of the city would amuse themselves. The paving is covered with such improvised games, hopscotch or marbles, whose rules have been long since lost. For years now, the site's keeper has been trying to understand what these small cavities mean. Is it a game of marbles, or a sort of puzzle whose code is lost forever? By trying to solve the mystery of this draft board of bygone days, the players revive gestures and attitudes and voice tones. The shadow of their hand mingles with that of the city's ghosts. And finally, they rediscover the pleasures of the game and the joy of living of the players of olden times. The traveler flying over Timgad notices at once the perfect layout of this square, divided into small plots of the same size. The city was conceived to give each inhabitant a lodging of the same size as the neighbors. But in fact, very soon, some privileged people occupied larger plots. In the very center of the city, archaeologists have found 400-square-meter large mansions. The city grew quickly. The Forum, too small, could no longer accommodate the basilica and some of the temples. A market was equally built outside the city's ramparts. But the region lived in peace. When one enters the city through the West Gate, one is surprised by the hustle and bustle in there. The center is commercial. Merchants live and trade there. In the two main streets, the shop fronts are protected by a pillared portico. The streets are noisy with the bustle of potters, coppersmiths, and carpenters. The Forum is quite near the shops. The inhabitants saunter about seeking to hear the latest news. Rome's dispatches arrive here, brought by the imperial post, traveling day and night at a rate of 150 kilometers per day. Ancient Timgad is still here, a showcase to a Roman world where it was pleasant to live.
Voici ce qu'on a écrit. Wenari, Lawari, Ludere, Ridere, Hoc est, Vivere. Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire en français? Chasser, prendre des bains, jouer, rire. Ça, c'est vivre. Bien sûr, c'est un flâneur qui était là et qui a écrit, qui a griffonné des choses ou qui a peut-être fait un jeu avec ces formules. Mais on peut prendre ça aussi comme un message philosophique, comme une façon de vivre épicurienne. Parce qu'évidemment, c'est le grand plaisir dans tout ça. Et qu'est-ce qu'il y a de plus agréable que de chasser probablement les fauves qui peuplaient les forêts qui étaient autour de Timgad et dont on sait qu'elles étaient nombreuses, que de prendre des bains dans ces magnifiques établissements thermaux qu'on a vus un peu partout dans Timgad, où l'eau coule en abondance, que jouer simplement, ou jouer peut-être avec de l'argent, faire des paris, on ne sait pas trop, rire, bien sûr, c'est la joie. Et évidemment, tout le monde, qui n'aspirerait pas à mener une vie de ce type? Je pense que là, on a peut-être une des raisons de l'attrait qu'exerçait Timgad sur les environs et sur toutes les populations environnantes.
"50 years after its erection, Timgad is peopled by hardly any other people but Numidians. Romans by birth are only a minority. The city's administration has been taken over by the natives, nowadays imbued with Greco-Latin culture. The local authority asserts itself, according to Rome's will. And in fact, Rome wants to go even further by allowing the men of the provinces to rise to higher responsibilities. As from the year 48 of our era, the Emperor Claudius has sought to recognize the rank of provincial elites by ratifying the juridical and political promotion of the Gallic people.
What was the cause of the Athenians' ruin in spite of their military worth, other than their habit of excluding the defeated enemy as well as the foreigner? Foreigners have ruled over us. Now they blend with our people by common customs, crafts and trades, marriage unions, and the golden wealth they share with us instead of possessing them separately. Senators, any custom considered today as going back to the earliest antiquity has been a new custom once. The people of Rome have acceded to the highest office after the aristocracy, the inhabitants of Latium after the people of Rome, and the other nations of Italy after the inhabitants of Latium.
This policy of integration is the greatest success of Roman civilization. Everywhere around the Mediterranean, dozens of nations shall willingly accept to be under Rome's domination, which means wealth and power. The access to citizenship offered real chances of social promotion. Nothing remains rigidly set in this world where ethnic origin has no impact on men's destiny. Rome grows richer and enriches its provinces. In the year 100, the founder of Timgad, Emperor Trajan, born in Spain, launches a great campaign of plantation of olive trees in North Africa. His successor Hadrian does the same. Both men grant important advantages to the peasants who plant olive trees. The Numidian and Mauritanian growers only dream of one thing: to be granted a citizenship that will allow them to benefit from fiscal advantages and sell their produce all over the empire. Thus, one can hardly be surprised by the fact of these men having easily adopted Rome's customs. North Africa's landscapes are drastically changed over dozens of square kilometers. With olive oil, such cities as Sufetula, Douga, or El Jem will thrive. The colonies founded by Rome have thus been the actual lungs of Romanization in North Africa. Trajan was not mistaken when he sent the veterans of the 3rd Legion into a desert void. They built a city where there was nothing before. 50 years later, The sons of Timgad enlisted in the legions to fight for the empire, and thus become full citizens.
Trajan avait vu juste, on fonde une ville, pas seulement pour conquérir un territoire, on fonde une ville pour attirer la population, on fonde une ville pour assurer le recrutement à la Légion, pour que la Légion commence à recruter sur place et plus du tout de l'étranger, ce qui s'est fait. Et troisièmement, pour encourager aussi et faire que la ville, la région se développe du point de vue économique et attire les autres populations, celles qui ne sont pas encore romaines, pour qu'elles aient envie de le devenir.
By mid-2nd century, Timgad has 15,000 inhabitants. Carthage has become the capital city of proconsular Africa and the third main city of the empire with 200,000 inhabitants. The Roman legionnaires marry Numidian women. Their sons will serve in the army. Two civilizations learn to tame each other as these alliances happen. On Timgad's funerary stelas coexist Berber, Punic, and Roman divinities. Some local gods have survived, others have merged into the gods of Rome's pantheon. An African Saturn has thus been born from the fusion of the Punic god Baal and the Greek Kronos. The languages have coexisted, and the gods have fused. On certain mosaics, we find proof of this extraordinary syncretism. Here, the city of Rome is surrounded by its provinces, represented by portraits of women wearing the distinctive signs of their origins. Africa is here, with a lock of hair in the shape of an elephant's trunk and two ivory tusks. The result of this cultural mixing has been extraordinary. African sculptors of Corinthian capitals will add acanthus leaves to their columns until they reach a sort of Baroque ornamentation, and use marble and stone together in ornamental decors that will make the artists of imperial Rome green with envy. The increasing wealth of a local middle class will also lead to the blossoming of mosaic ornamental tiling. Its great artists will work all over the empire. In the year 191, this province will provide one of the greatest imperial dynasties, the Severi, whose birthplace was the Tripolis region, present-day Libya. In 212, Caracalla proclaims a revolutionary edict. He grants citizenship to all free men of the empire. It is the successful outcome of 500 years of Romanization. In 244, Philip the Arab is born 90 kilometers away from Damascus, in Syria, and will succeed to Severus Alexander, also born in that city. Many of those who ruled over the empire were not born in Rome itself. They were the issue of a cultural mixing started by Rome's policy of conquest. Pax Romana, the Roman peace, hadn't been an empty slogan. And though the empire had been conquered by the legion's swords, it is a policy of tolerance and integration that allowed it to last 500 years. Once Carthage had been razed, Africa did not become Roman. It was Rome that became African.